And if you haven't seen MLW live, you got to see it live. And if you can't see it live, then check it out on BN on Friday night.
Yeah, every Friday night, MLW Fusion on BN Sports, and it's one of my favorite wrestling shows. It's the perfect wrestling show for me, Mark, because it's just an hour long. A lot of people complain about the 3-hour Monday Night Raws. It's an hour show. It's just like what we grew up on, the 60-minute wrestling show, and it's perfect.
Yeah, it is, and you get an alternative. You get to see something else, and you get to see a completely different style of wrestling and all kinds of different styles all in one show in that compact 1 hour.
And you get Tony Schiavone on the broadcast.
Well,
oh, come on.
beautiful.
Tony Schiavone does a great job.
Why you got to point out our
Schiavone.
warts?
But Tony is beautiful.
Tony does a great job. He's got. I mean,
love Tony.
we grew up on Tony Schiavone.
You're not that old.
I'm pretty old. I just turned 47 on Sunday. So I grew up watching Tony Schiavone doing the NWA on TBS. So it's a big thrill to hear him every Friday on MLW Fusion.
And I grew up in the business brutalizing Tony Schiavone. So that's a good thing. I like to give Tony a hard time.
And you know, everyone talk. Obviously, there's so much to talk to you about. And you know, as a hardcore wrestling fan, as an old school wrestling fan, you know, you're somebody that worked with Paul Bosch. You're somebody that worked with Bill Watts. I mean, the pedigree that you have when it comes to this business is second to none.
Well, thank you for that. It was a long time coming. As I sit there and sometimes I add it up, and it's 45 years in the wrestling business. I'm not that old, man. That's kind of crazy.
You started young, though.
I did. I started when I was in the womb. So
Wrestling to get out.
Yeah, I started when I was 10 years old, doing a little bit of everything and having a whole lot of fun. So yes, it's been a long time, and had the great opportunity to truly work with the greats in the wrestling business.
And before you came on, Bruce, I was telling Dave that I would read stuff because, you know, when I went down to Louisville, Jimmy Cornette had this unbelievable library, and he said, Mark, you can use it anytime you want to, which probably was a mistake because, you know, you put a mark, no pun intended, in a room full of like wrestling videos and books. And I would read stuff. And I remember when I came back and I started talking to you, and I was like, yeah, did you know that so-and-so did this? And you said, I was there. And I was like, no. And it was like, you've been around so long. And that was, 2001, 2002. And I wanted to, you know, every time I get the guys that influence me a lot on the show, I want to thank them because you were one of those guys that helped me realize that nothing that's ever been done cannot be done again. And if you study what the past, it'll have an effect on your future. And you was 100% right. And I wanted to thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And it's just goes to show, you know, the guys that have heart, the guys that have passion for the business, those are the ones, in my opinion, that will always shine through. And those are the ones that will rise to the top because there's a desire to rise to the top. It's not a desire to make more money. It's not a desire to have more fame. It's a desire to just be the best. And you can always tell those guys. And Mark is one of those guys who wanted to be the best.
Share a good Mark Henry. You got to have a good Mark Henry story.
God, there were a lot of them. I remember, and this is a funny one. Mark broke his leg training in Stanford at the studio. They had to bring, do you remember this? They had to bring the fire department because the stretcher couldn't hold him. Wow. He was so big. He was so wide and he was so big. And they're like, how are we going to get him into the ambulance and into the stretcher? And so Mark had snapped his leg, done a pretty good job on his leg. And all he wanted, he was rooming with a guy, Occam Albrecht, who was a bodybuilder and, again, who was this big, wide guy, but that's beside the point. But Mark, when he finally got home and he was there and Occam was like, okay, what do you want? And Mark starts to say what he wants and Occam cuts him off. He says, now that I am getting you food and things, no milkshakes for you. And I'm standing in the hallway of y'all's apartment there and I am just laughing because now Occam would always try to get Mark to, you know, eat better and eat like a bodybuilder. Well, Mark wanted to eat like a damn power lifter. Mark wanted like Food.
Milkshakes.
Yes.
Fried chicken.
Yes. Good food.
And Akam was like, he tortured the hell out of me too, by the way, just so you know.
Oh, I know.
Anything I ordered, he would bring back chicken breast and bodybuilder food. And I hated his guts for that.
Yeah.
I really did.
But he felt bad that Mark had broken his leg. And then, what do you want? And Mark says, okay, I want this. And I'm thinking, no milkshake for you. I was standing in the hallway and I heard that. I just laughed my ass off. It was funny. Here's Mark with his leg up, can't move, is trying to figure out how he's going to go to the bathroom and do everything else for the next couple of weeks. And it was brutal.
Mark, how about you? Get a good Bruce Prichard story?
No. Don't give him the floor.
Oh, yeah. So we're doing a Valentine's Day special. Me and Mae Young were in the bed, and I had these. All I had on was silk boxers, and the opening kept coming undone. So one of the people that was working for us got some safety pins, and we pinned it shut. So Mae is trying to get me. She's like, she kept on trying to open my boxers. She was, just being a mess. And Bruce is literally producing this segment, and he is red like Brother Love, sitting against the wall because he can't stand. He was laughing so hard. And just about that time, Mae pulls a cigar out and lights it in the hotel room, and is laying in the bed smoking a cigar. And Bruce is like, man, you got to put that out. And why the hell I got to put this out? And I mean, it was just like the funniest thing to see him try to produce this show, and he can't stand. He can't breathe. He's sitting on the floor against the wall, like, okay, guys, okay, stop it. Look, we got to get this done. Vince is gonna be pissed. Like, come on, like, you got to work with me. Like, and it was one of my favorite scenes that I ever done with the company.
Mae was gonna get her some chocolate that day. One way or another, she was gonna get it. And the world's strongest man, there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it.
Bro, I was weak. I was trying my best to be like Bruce and keep working, but she was like laying right next to me. I had to put my arm down on top of the sheets to keep her from messing with me. Oh my God.
And still couldn't stop her.
Still couldn't stop. She was funny, man. Like, I mean, that was the best time in my career as far as like having a good time. Like, Sex with Chocolate was the fun time. Like, I wasn't, there was no pressure. It was like, go out there and do your best. And I had a ball doing it.
Listening to Something to Wrestle, what you do with Conrad Thompson, you guys have amazing chemistry together, is how you just remember the smallest details of all these stories and all these wrestlers that you talk about. And you go, 2, 3, sometimes close to 4 hours with these shows. Like, your memory is unbelievable. I mean, obviously the opposite of Tony Schiavone, because Tony Schiavone doesn't remember anything. But you do have that great memory of all these events and special events.
It's the memory is I had so many great times and so many great stories and experiences. When it comes to me and how it affected me, I do have a very good memory. When somebody asks me a particular finish or something that happened in a particular match that I may not have been involved in, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But if I was involved in it during so much of that, creating a lot of it, it was how it affected me. And that's the spin that I try and put on everything. Is it may not be what you remember. It may not be what the talent on the other side remembers, but it's how I remember it because of the effect it had on me and how I saw it and what I had to deal with at the time. So it's long term is great. I can't tell you what I did 2 days ago. But that's just old age. They kind of catching up on me. But I always used to laugh because when my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia, he could remember 30, 40 years ago in detail, but he had no idea who anybody was.
Wow.
So I think I'm getting there. Not yet, but I'm close.
Let's not say that. Do you enjoy doing the show?
I love doing the show. It's an awful lot of fun because you get to go back and relive. And Conrad is kind of like a prosecutor in the way that he will ask questions sometimes and dig deep to go in and try and get more of the story, if you will. So this past Sunday, we do live shows. We're actually going to be here in New York on August 18th at the Gramercy. Cheap plug, brucepritchard.com for tickets. But our special guest, I had Jerry McDivitt, who's Vince McMahon's attorney and the attorney for the WWE. And McDivitt came out, and I said, all right, big boy, go ahead, prosecute him. You want to play? The only man that I ever was in fear of sitting across, and being cross-examined by Jerry McDivitt was a little intense, and he was our guest. And he stole the show. It was awesome.
One thing that I love about the show is, obviously, like I mentioned before, the chemistry between you and Conrad, but Conrad is that voice of the fan. He says that this isn't his job. He's just a fan. He's the mortgage guy, and so he asks those tough questions that a lot of fans want to know about. Does he sometimes get under your skin?
Yeah, he does, because his narrative and the narrative that he chooses to follow, and all he has ever known as a fan, has been the narrative of the dirt sheets and the people that write from afar, that are not actually involved in the business, that just hear things, a lot of rumor and innuendo from other people, most of the time disgruntled wrestlers or former employees that have an axe to grind. So that has always been the only narrative that's ever been out there, and no one that worked with Vince or worked with us closely or was actually in the know has ever responded to any of that. And I decided, when I knew I was never going to be back in the wrestling business in any way, shape, or form, surely would never be back in WWE on the WWE Network doing a show, I said, yeah, you know what? I'll talk about it. And because it's everything that you think is true, 90% of it is wrong. So that was the approach we took, and that's what he uses for a lot of his research, and I just find myself debunking so much of the narrative that's been out there all these years.
Well, there's Bruce, a name. Go ahead, Mark, please.
Bruce, don't you find that that's usually the case, that people tell the story that they heard rather than what the truth was?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always go back and I love to hear the different versions of the Montreal Screwjob, because everybody has a different version. And I was there. And the truth is not as exciting. Actually, the truth was very fascinating, but it's not as exciting as sometimes it's portrayed. And the people that say that they were there just weren't there.
Yeah, it was people that wasn't. I was there. And I remember hearing somebody talk about it, and they didn't come into business till about 2 years after.
Yeah.
I'm like, you wasn't there.
Yeah, exactly. So that part is always the part that you can tell when you listen to some of the things that are said, that okay, I can pretty much tell you where that story came from. And the part that would always irritate me the most was when these guys would call, and I had to be the guy to either confirm or deny. They never asked you for the truth. They just, can you confirm or deny? No, I deny that. Or I would give them facts, like, we drew 10,000 people. This was the gate. This is how many were paid. This is how many were comped. This is our taxes. And they would print something completely different that some guy in the third row who bought a ticket would tell them, no, there weren't 10,000 people there. There were only 3,000 people. And of those 3,000 people, 2,000 were comps. We're paying taxes on, 10,000 tickets sold. We're paying taxes on a $300,000 gate. Why would you do that if you really only drew 3,000 and 2,000 were comps?
Yeah.
You wouldn't. And all that was public record that you could have gone and just checked. So those are the things that irritate me the most.
You mentioned something else to wrestle, and being on the WWE Network. I'm sure you never thought you'd be back in the WWE fold, but
no.
Your show on the network, how has that gone? Because I know there was some concerns with the fans that it would be edited or they would put some constraints on you. How has that relationship been?
Absolutely tremendous. It's been a great relationship. They did everything that they said they would do, and we did everything we said we would do. The idea that they wanted authentic. They wanted us to do our style, our brand of podcast, but with a video version. we wanted them to provide the video backup of a lot of the things that I talk about. Midway through, I realized and I found out that they had footage I didn't even know they had. And a lot of these producers were going back and finding things with me producing backstage and just obscure shots, like when they were doing a documentary at WrestleMania in Seattle. I didn't even know there was a camera present. So that helped us tell our stories. So I started to cheat a little bit, and I would say, hey, I'm pretty sure I have footage of this. Can you guys go back and find it? Like the CM Punk stuff. I knew there was that interview that I had done with him that was just for us, never to be aired. Ted DiBiase, and as Mark knows, I used to, before I would produce a pre-tape or something, I would walk through it with the cameraman, me being the talent. So they would tape that, make sure that we had the lighting and everything just right. So there's a lot of footage that they have of me portraying the talent for the cameraman and everything, and me producing talent backstage where they just would roll tape and you didn't know it. It's not always framed. It's not perfect, but it's interesting. So that helped a lot, and them being able to have the footage to back up the stories has made it pretty cool.
Very cool.
Bruce, I have a question for you. In your career, there's been so many things that you've been involved in. Is there one thing that you have your DNA on, that you have your fingertips on, that you are really, really proud of, and that kind of set you, that makes you say, I'm happy that I was involved in that?
The Undertaker, creating The Undertaker and Kane. That, first of all, just seeing, I was a fan of Mean Mark Callis when he first started in Dallas, and I watched him through his time in WCW. I always liked him. I didn't know him personally, but I liked him, the way he worked. He was unique, and I created that character, not necessarily The Undertaker, but he was the black to Brother Loves White, and he was the yin to my yang. And then Vince came up with the name The Undertaker. But being able to build that character and having the human being behind that character that really made it work. It wasn't me. It was the guy behind the character that made it work. And then the story of Kane and his brother that was in the fire and the whole 9 yards. That story and those two characters are probably that immediately that I point to and go, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I would say. I sit here as a fan, and I remember my godson, Greg, when he was, he was probably 6 at the time, maybe 5. Whenever the Undertaker's music used to play, he used to run out of the room because he was so afraid of the Undertaker. And I've been a fan.
So am I.
That's because you knew that you might get ribbed. But it was creating that character. It really blessed the business. Like, I can see why you're most proud of it, and thank you for doing that.
Well, and on top of it, the longevity that I don't think any of us thought that character would last 25 years and still be as relevant today as it was the first day that he walked out. So, and he's been able to reinvent himself so many times. And then Kane, same thing. Kane was created to be an opponent, a short-term opponent for The Undertaker. Short story, man, we'll do this, and then we'll find something else for him to do. 20 years later.
Yeah, here we are in 2018. He's just on the Extreme Rules pay-per-view. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of creativity between you and Bischoff, and I know you guys are friends and all that. But just asking you a question, who do you think was better creatively? Jim Cornette, Paul Heyman, or Eric Bischoff?
Paul Heyman. And I think that Jim Cornette is extremely creative, and I think that Eric Bischoff would probably tell you that creative wasn't really his forte. But of those three, that Heyman has an eye and a twisted enough mind that Paul is extremely creative. And I used to also say that Paul Heyman was just a New York version of Jim Cornette, and that Jim Cornette was just a Southern version of Paul Heyman. But I think that they're both extremely creative. I would give the edge there to Heyman. If I may, sir. Another volley. I am the greatest. I am a genius, sir. I put ECW out of business on my own.
He mentioned the table for three, and the table for three premiered last night after Raw, and you're with JBL and you're with Eric Bischoff, and it's so it's so funny watching that, and you could see there's still a little bit of I'm not going to say disdain, but a little animosity, that of that Monday Night War from now 20 years ago.
Sure,
and you could still feel the tension between you and Eric Bischoff.
Well, Eric always likes to say, "Oh yeah, well, people rewrite history." I said, "No, Eric. Winners write history. That's your problem. You're angry that you don't have the opportunity to rewrite history because we wrote it. It's our show. We're still in business. We beat you." And I always like debating that with Eric, and I learned an awful lot from Eric through the years just talking to him. And Eric went out and changed the wrestling business. Say what you will about Eric Bischoff and say what you will about what he did. He changed the wrestling business. He changed how we operated, changed contracts for the boys. He changed television landscape and was very successful at it. Wasn't able to sustain it, but he was very successful at it.
844-796-7874. Let's go out to Chris in Pennsylvania. Chris, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Y'all brought up the Montreal Screwjob earlier. Just a little question on that. Like, I have the book from Shawn Michaels, and I've read some stuff from Bret Hart. What was the fear in the locker room or from the higher-ups? What was that like? Like, did you all call in, like, National Guard because you know this is going to get ugly very fast? Or how was that handled in the back?
No, it was myself, Jerry Briscoe, Shane McMahon, and Vince that made the trek from Vince's office to Bret's locker room. And with the exception, everybody that was in the match, Undertaker, Sergeant Slaughter, and Tony Gurria were the only other people in that room. So it wasn't, Vince went, he knew what he had to do. He knew he had to face Bret face to face. He did that. And, what happened. But it wasn't really that much more than that. And what Vince did was what he had to do to protect all of us in the company.
Mark, do you have any remembrances of that period? Because you mentioned before that so many people remark on it that weren't even a part of the company at the time. What were your thoughts when that all went down?
Well, I remember the two locker rooms that were side by side, and they told everybody, "Hey, man, get out of this locker room, go in the other locker room," and everybody went in there because Bret was in there packing his stuff like, "I'm getting the hell out of here." And Vince and Shawn and the office all came in. And it wasn't no security guards, all these people, the stuff people was talking about, that bullshit. Like, they didn't know what was going on. And we all, even though we knew what was going on, we were in a separate locker room. We were in the locker room next to it. And, of course, everybody had their ear to the wall trying to hear, but you couldn't hear everything that was said and what was going on. And I'm going to leave it at that.
All right.
Because it ain't nobody business.
Okay. 844-796-7874. Hope you're not angry at me for asking.
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
All right. I don't want you
it's
to
just
get angry
that, like, stuff like that is very sensitive to our industry. It's like airing the families of dirty laundry. And, Vince and Bret and Shawn and all the parties involved can sit together and
right.
Then there's nothing else to talk about.
There's a name that's mentioned on this show a lot, and I don't have a problem. I don't think Mark has a problem. Bully definitely does, and I think you do too. But a Dave Meltzer.
Yeah, I think he's an asshole.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
No, because I'm just bringing about that. This business is looked upon so differently now, and obviously there's many reasons for it. But And you just mentioned about how you feel about Dave Meltzer, but
let me clarify now. I don't think Dave's an asshole. I actually think Dave's a nice guy. I don't like what Dave does, and I feel that Dave, being wrong 90% of the time, and some of the things that he has said and done over the years, I completely disagree with. Personally, I think Dave's a nice guy. I've never had a crossword with him in my life, but I don't care for what he does, and I don't care how he goes about doing it, I guess is the main thing. I don't care if someone writes about you and has their opinion and what have you. I feel that his comes from a bad place, and I feel that he looks for the dirt versus the story.
It's interesting because, here at SiriusXM, we have all these different channels and stations, and I'll just look at it as the NFL. There's people, there are insiders that cover the NFL, like a Peter King, and, there's so many other insiders. But you just mentioned, like, with Dave Meltzer, 90% of the time he's wrong. And the one thing that worries me when it comes to this business, and when you look at some of these dirt sheets, there's no accountability.
Right.
If Peter King is wrong 50% of the time, he's going to be out of a job. A lot of these insiders, like Chris Mortensen, if he's wrong 50% of the time, he's out of a job because there's accountability. Do you feel like when it comes to a lot of these pro wrestling sites that there are no accountability?
There's zero accountability. They sit behind a keyboard and they can write whatever they want to. They use the guise of I'm a journalist and I've got sources that I won't reveal my sources. When a lot of times it's a 12-year-old kid sitting in the third row who had to buy a ticket to get into the event who thinks that they know how to count a house, and is giving their review on a match that they know nothing about. I just prefer, and again, everybody can be a critic and say what you want, what you like, what you don't like. I love wrestling. So I enjoy going and watching wrestling. I like to watch it from top to bottom. Sometimes there's good matches, sometimes there's bad matches, but that's what I like about it. If they were all just the greatest things in the world, I like stories. Tell me a good story, get me involved in it, and I'm happy. But I don't have to go and critique it after the fact. And there are people that like that, and that's cool. I guess, again, I just go back to the things like there was something that he wrote not long ago in regard to WWE purchasing an independent wrestling company. And it was like, they are going to do it. Now, of course, this could change completely, and this may not happen. I'm like, the headline is WWE to buy whatever company. I don't even remember what it was. But then when you read it, it's like, the rumors are that WWE is going to, and I get that, man. It's your clickbait and so on and so forth. But it amounted to just a hill of nothing. Yeah. So it's you can do that with anything. Hey, I heard that I'm going to be hired at New Japan Wrestling for $8 million a year. Okay.
You're sitting here with us in studio talking about MLW.
It could fall through, and it could not happen. I mean, I haven't spoken to anybody at New Japan Pro Wrestling, and but it could happen.
Sounds good.
It could happen. Good. Why wouldn't they? Just saying.
Makes a good point there, Mark.
That might be the voice of a new segment. Just saying.
Just throwing it out there.
I heard Mark. You know what? I heard Mark, and this is honest God truth. I heard Mark Henry's contract was for $6 million a year, guaranteed. 10 years, $6 million.
Don't tell my wife
$6 million. $6 million. I heard that.
She gonna be like, yeah. Where's that other $5,999,000?
Okay, so we have been able to learn that your contract is actually for but that's
$1,000.
But that kind of stuff has been printed out there.
Yeah.
It truly has been printed out there. And when I used to go back and I would hear these outrageous things, well, so-and-so was making this. And I won't talk money. I won't talk what guys are making because that was part of my job, that was confidential. And it's like, I throw back at Conrad. When Conrad asked me money questions, I want to say to him, okay, hey, you did a mortgage for Joe Bevins the other day. How much does he make a year? In the position I was in, I'm not at liberty to disclose what a guy made. if they want, hey, if you want to tell people how much you make, go for it. I'm not going to.
Plus, it's not fair because let's just say a writer or anybody in creative, they can't say what's being worked on. They can't say what's going to happen on the next week's Raw or next week's SmackDown. Like when it comes to, the NFL or Major League Baseball, obviously you have to make it public about any injuries that are a part of that team.
Right.
And again, like, doing this show, Mark, if I say something on the air, you can call me out, which you have in the past. Bully can call me out, and we take phone calls and they can call me out. With a lot of these websites, there's no ramifications for what's being